France built the most expensive wall in history, and enemies just walked around it. Their king smelled so bad, diplomats passed out. One president fell out of a train in his pajamas, and nobody believed he was president. A con man sold the Eiffel Tower for scrap metal, got away with it, came back, and sold it again. This is not a history lesson. This is 33 reasons France was absolutely unhinged for centuries and somehow became a world power anyway. Let us get into it. 1. France once built the most expensive defensive fortification in history, and it worked perfectly for about 5 minutes. The Maginot Line cost billions in today's money, took nearly a decade to construct, and stretched along the entire German border. It had underground railways, air conditioning, and enough firepower to stop any army on Earth. The French military was absolutely convinced that Germany would never get through. And honestly, they were right. Germany did not go through. They just went around. In 1940, the German army simply drove their tanks through Belgium and the Ardennes forest, a route the French considered impassable because of some trees. The Maginot Line sat there, fully operational, completely useless, like a state-of-the-art security system on a house with no back door. 2. In France, you can legally marry a dead person. This is not a joke, and it is not some ancient forgotten law. It is actively used. If you can prove the deceased intended to marry you before they died, the President of France can personally grant permission for a posthumous wedding. The law dates back to 1959, when a dam collapse killed over 400 people, and a pregnant woman petitioned to marry her dead fiancé. President de Gaulle approved it, and the law stuck around. Every year, dozens of requests come in. Some get approved. So technically, death is not a deal-breaker for French romance. You just need paperwork, patience, and presidential approval. The ceremony happens, the marriage is backdated to the day before death. And congratulations, you are officially a widow before you even finish the wedding cake. 3. Louis XIV, the Sun King, the man who built Versailles and ruled France for 72 years, reportedly took only 2 or 3 full baths in his entire life. His doctors believed water opened the pores and let disease in. So instead of washing, Louis would just wipe himself with a dry cloth and change his shirt. The result? A smell so legendary that foreign diplomats reportedly gagged, cried, or outright fainted when standing too close. Courtiers developed complex systems to avoid being downwind. Perfume use at Versailles exploded, not for luxury, but for survival. The most powerful man in Europe, draped in gold and silk, smelled like a gym locker that had never been opened. And everyone just had to smile and call him glorious. 4. In 1925, a man named Victor Lustig pulled off one of the greatest scams in history. He sold the Eiffel Tower for scrap metal. Lustig posed as a government official, told a group of scrap dealers the tower was too expensive to maintain, and convinced one of them to bribe him for the contract. The dealer paid, Lustig vanished, and by the time the victim realized he had been conned, he was too embarrassed to call the police. So Lustig came back and did it again. Same scam, different buyer. He sold the Eiffel Tower twice, got away both times, and eventually fled to America where he kept scamming until the Secret Service finally caught him for counterfeiting. The French government never officially acknowledged the scam happened because admitting it would have been even more embarrassing. 5. Versailles, the crown jewel of French architecture, the symbol of royal power and elegance, had almost no toilets. The palace was designed for grandeur, not plumbing. So what did the thousands of aristocrats, servants, and guests do? They improvised. Behind curtains and stairwells and corners, anywhere they could find a moment of privacy. Chamber pots overflowed constantly. Servants could not keep up. The smell became so unbearable that the court would occasionally relocate just so the palace could be cleaned. Imagine wearing a dress worth more than a house. Your hair stacked 2 feet high, diamonds on every finger, and you are squatting behind a velvet drape in a hallway because that is just how things worked. Versailles. Beautiful, revolutionary, and absolutely reeking. 6. King Charles VIII of France died because he was too excited about tennis. In 1498, he was rushing through a doorway at the Château d'Amboise to watch a tennis match when he smashed his head into a low stone lintel. He hit it so hard that he kept walking, watched some of the game, made small talk, and then collapsed into a coma. He died 9 hours later. The King of France, taken out by architecture and poor spatial awareness. He was 27 years old, had no surviving children, and his dynasty ended because a doorframe was slightly too short. The lesson here is clear. Always check your clearance, and maybe do not sprint indoors, even if tennis is really exciting. 7. Napoleon Bonaparte, the military genius who conquered most of Europe, once ran away from rabbits. In 1807, after signing a peace treaty, Napoleon organized a celebratory rabbit hunt. His staff gathered hundreds of rabbits for the occasion. But instead of fleeing in terror when released, the rabbits charged directly at Napoleon. Turns out, they were domesticated rabbits, not wild ones, and they associated humans with food. So hundreds of hungry, fearless bunnies swarmed the emperor, climbing his legs, surrounding his carriage. Napoleon, the man who stared down armies, retreated. He literally fled the scene. His officers tried to beat the rabbits back with sticks, but the fluffy tide kept coming. It remains one of the most humiliating moments in French military history that was not actually a battle. 8. During the siege of Paris in 1870, Prussian forces surrounded the city for 4 months. Food ran out. Parisians ate horses first, then cats and dogs, then rats. And when those were gone, they turned to the zoo. The animals of the Jardin des Plantes were butchered and sold at premium prices. Elephant trunk became a delicacy. Kangaroo stew appeared on restaurant menus. The famous elephants Castor and Pollux were sold for 27,000 francs and served to wealthy Parisians who wanted exotic protein with their desperate survival. Only the monkeys and the big cats were spared because nobody wanted to eat something that looked too human, and lion meat was considered too risky. Christmas dinner in 1870. Paris featured antelope, camel, and wolf. Survival tastes weird. 9. Louis XIX holds the record for the shortest reign of any monarch in history, exactly 20 minutes. In 1830, after his father Charles X abdicated during the July Revolution, Louis technically became King of France. But instead of accepting the crown, he immediately signed his own abdication papers. 20 minutes later, the throne passed to his cousin. He was king just long enough to probably sit down once, sign a document, and realize he wanted absolutely no part of whatever mess was happening. In fairness, France was burning, mobs were in the streets, and being a Bourbon king in 1830 seemed like a very bad career move. Louis made the mathematically correct decision: maximum royal title, minimum actual responsibility or risk of execution. 10. King Charles VI of France genuinely believed he was made of glass. During bouts of mental illness that plagued him throughout his life, Charles became convinced his body was fragile and transparent, and that any physical contact would shatter him into pieces. He had iron rods sewn into his clothing to protect himself from breaking. He refused to let anyone touch him. Servants had to approach carefully, like he was an actual window. This was not a metaphor or eccentricity. The man truly thought he would crack. He also sometimes forgot he was king, forgot his own name, and ran through the halls of the palace screaming. France was ruled by this man for over 40 years. His reign was called Charles the Mad, and honestly, the name undersells it. 11. Antoine Augustin Parmentier, a French pharmacist, had one mission: convince France that potatoes were food, not pig slop or poison. The French hated potatoes. They blamed them for leprosy. So Parmentier got creative. He planted a potato field outside Paris and hired armed guards to patrol it during the day. The guards made the potatoes look valuable, like treasure worth protecting. Then, at night, Parmentier deliberately pulled the guards away. Local peasants, curious about what could possibly need such heavy security, snuck in and stole the potatoes. They planted them, ate them, and realized potatoes were actually fine. Parmentier essentially reverse psychologied an entire nation into accepting a new food. The man understood marketing centuries before marketing existed. France now puts his name on potato dishes. 12. In 1920, French President Paul Deschanel fell out of a moving train in the middle of the night, wearing nothing but his pajamas. He wandered to a nearby railway crossing, barefoot and confused, where a railroad worker found him. When Deschanel said he was the president of France, the worker assumed he was a drunk lunatic and basically told him to sleep it off. Eventually, someone recognized him, but the damage was done. The story spread everywhere. Deschanel's mental health had already been fragile, and this very public humiliation accelerated his decline. He resigned a few months later. Imagine being the actual president, telling the truth, and no one believes you because you look like a disheveled raccoon that escaped from a sleeper car. France is brutal. 13. During World War I, as German bombers began targeting Paris, the French military came up with an unhinged solution: build a fake Paris. Just outside the city, they constructed a decoy made of wood, canvas, and electric lights designed to look like factories, train stations, and streets from the air. The idea was simple. Bombers flying at night would mistake the fake city for the real one and waste their payloads on painted plywood. The project was never fully completed before the war ended, but portions were built and tested. The lights mimicked the glow of the real city. Streets were painted on the ground. From high enough altitude, it was convincing. France literally tried to gaslight enemy pilots with an entire fake capital. That is commitment to misdirection. 14. In medieval France, animals were regularly put on trial for crimes. And in one famous case, a lawyer named Bartholomew Chassenet was assigned to defend a group of rats accused of destroying a barley crop. When the rats failed to appear in court, Chassenet did not lose. He argued that his clients had been properly summoned, but could not attend because the journey to court was too dangerous. Why? Because cats, their natural assassins, lurked along the roads. The court accepted this argument and gave the rats more time to appear. Chassenet became famous for this defense, and honestly, it is a better legal strategy than half the stuff you see today. Medieval French law, where vermin had better representation than some humans. 15. The croissant, that flaky, buttery symbol of French breakfast culture, is not French at all. It originated in Austria, where it was called Kipferl, a crescent-shaped bread that had existed for centuries. The pastry allegedly came to France thanks to Marie Antoinette, who missed the foods of her homeland and had Austrian bakers recreate them in Paris. French bakers later adapted the recipe, adding their laminated dough technique, and eventually claimed the whole thing as their own. So every time someone bites into a croissant thinking it is peak French cuisine, they are actually eating Austrian heritage with French butter. The French are very good at taking other people's food, improving it slightly, and then acting like they invented it. Respect the hustle. 16. In 1386, in the town of Falaise, a pig was arrested, tried, and executed for murder. The pig had attacked and killed an infant, and the local court treated the case exactly like a human crime. The pig was held in prison, given a trial with a judge and witnesses, and even dressed in human clothing for the execution. A crowd gathered in the public square to watch the pig be hanged. This was not unique. Animal trials happened across medieval Europe for centuries. Pigs, donkeys, rats, even insects faced formal legal proceedings. The logic was that all creatures were morally responsible for their actions. So if a pig committed murder, the pig had to face justice. In a little jacket, on a scaffold, in front of the whole town. 17. The French resistance came up with some surprisingly petty ways to annoy the Nazi occupation, and one of the best was itching powder. Resistance members would sneak into German supply depots and laundry facilities, sprinkling a specially made powder into uniforms and underwear. The result: thousands of German soldiers scratching themselves raw, unable to focus, constantly uncomfortable. It was not deadly, but it was brilliantly demoralizing. Imagine trying to maintain the image of a disciplined, terrifying occupying force while you cannot stop clawing at your own pants. The powder was reportedly made from rosehip seeds, ground fine enough to cause maximum irritation without leaving visible traces. It was psychological warfare at its pettiest and funniest. The resistance understood that sometimes making your enemy miserable is its own victory. 18. In 18th century France, aristocratic women's hairstyles reached genuinely insane heights, sometimes 3 feet tall, supported by wire frames, cushions, and enough pomade to grease a ship. But height was not enough. Women decorated their hair with feathers, jewels, model ships, and in some documented cases, actual bird cages containing live birds. These weren't metaphors. Real birds, in hair, chirping. The hairstyles were so tall that women had to kneel or sit sideways in carriages. Doors became obstacles. Chandeliers became enemies. One famous story claims a woman's hair caught fire from candles and she barely noticed because the structure was so far from her actual head. French fashion peaked at endangered bird habitat on skull. It was glorious madness. 19. In September 1914, the German army was advancing toward Paris so fast that French forces desperately needed reinforcements at the Marne River. The problem? Not enough trains. The solution? Taxis. The French military commandeered about 600 Parisian taxis and used them to shuttle roughly 6,000 soldiers to the front lines. Each taxi made multiple trips, ferrying troops directly into battle. It was chaotic, improvised, and somehow it worked. The reinforcements helped stop the German advance and saved Paris. The drivers were later paid their normal fare by the army. This was the first large-scale use of motor vehicles to move troops in war, and it started with regular city cabs. The Battle of the Marne was won partly because Paris had a decent taxi fleet. 20. Cardinal Richelieu, the ruthless political mastermind who essentially ran France for nearly 2 decades, had one soft spot: cats. He adored them. He kept at least 14 cats in his personal chambers, gave them ridiculous names like Lucifer, Ludovic the Cruel, and Gazette, and spent hours playing with them. In his will, Richelieu left money specifically for the care and feeding of his cats after his death, essentially setting up a feline trust fund. The man who crushed rebellions, manipulated kings, and built the French state into a European powerhouse wanted nothing more than to make sure his cats lived comfortably after he was gone. Power corrupts, but apparently it does not corrupt your love for fluffy little idiots. 21. France once taxed windows. Starting in the late 18th century, the government levied a tax based on how many windows a building had. The logic was simple. More windows meant a wealthier owner, but the unintended consequence was brutal. Poor families bricked up their windows to avoid paying. Entire neighborhoods went dark. Homes became poorly ventilated, damp, and disease-ridden. Tuberculosis spread faster. Rickets increased because people were not getting enough sunlight. The tax stayed in effect for over a century, slowly making French cities darker and sicker. It was finally abolished in 1926, but you can still see bricked-up window frames on old buildings today, monuments to one of the dumbest fiscal policies in European history. Sometimes governments are their own worst enemy. 22. French fries are not French. They are almost certainly Belgian. The origin story claims that during World War I, American soldiers stationed in Belgium tasted fried potatoes and loved them. But since the local soldiers spoke French, Belgium has French-speaking regions, the Americans assumed the food was French and started calling them French fries. The name stuck forever. Belgium has been annoyed about this for over a century. France, meanwhile, happily accepts credit for a food they did not invent, served with ketchup they tried to ban. The whole thing is a linguistic accident that became global fact. Belgium invented them. France got the fame. America doused them in cheese and called it innovation. Everyone is wrong and nobody cares. 23. Victor Hugo, author of Les Miserables and The Hunchback of Notre Dame, had an ego approximately the size of France itself. He genuinely believed that Paris should be renamed after him. Not as a joke, not as hyperbole. He thought Hugo would be a fine name for the capital, and he said so publicly. He also filled his house with portraits of himself, expected to be treated like royalty wherever he went, and once described himself as the greatest French writer of all time while other French writers were still alive. His funeral in 1885 drew 2 million people, so maybe he was onto something. But suggesting a city of millions rename itself after you while you are still breathing requires a level of confidence that borders on clinical. Victor Hugo contained multitudes, mostly of himself. 24. Under King Henry IV, dueling was so popular in France that it became a genuine national crisis. Between 1589 and 1607, over 4,000 French noblemen died in duels. 4,000. That is not romanticized sword fighting. That is an extinction-level event for the aristocracy. Men were killing each other over insults, glances, card games, and rumors. The king kept issuing edicts banning duels, and nobles kept ignoring them because honor mattered more than law. Some families lost multiple sons in a single generation. France was literally bleeding out its ruling class over petty beefs. The duel epidemic only slowed after Richelieu started executing people for participating, regardless of who won. Sometimes you need a cardinal with no patience to fix a culture of dramatic overreaction. 25. Gustave Eiffel, the man who designed the Eiffel Tower, included a secret apartment at the very top, and he kept it entirely for himself. While Paris gawked at his iron masterpiece, Eiffel had a private room above everyone, furnished with wooden cabinets, wallpaper, a grand piano, and velvet furniture. He used it to entertain elite guests. Thomas Edison reportedly visited and received a tour. Everyone else in Paris had to climb 1,665 steps or wait in line for elevators, but Eiffel literally built himself a penthouse in the sky. The public tried to bribe him for access, offering massive sums for a single night. He refused. The room still exists, preserved today with wax figures of Eiffel and Edison hanging out. He engineered the ultimate exclusive lounge. 26. King Louis XVI, the monarch who would eventually lose his head in the French Revolution, had a peculiar hobby: making locks, not overseeing craftsmen. Actually forging and assembling locks himself. He had a private workshop in Versailles, spent hours filing metal, and apparently found real joy in mechanical puzzles. Meanwhile, his country was drowning in debt, peasants were starving, and political unrest was building toward the most violent revolution in European history. While his advisors begged him to address the crisis, Louis was often in his workshop, happily tinkering with tumblers and keys. There is something almost tragic about it. A king who would rather build locks than deal with the problems that would eventually lock him in a prison cell. 27. After the French Revolution, the new government decided that even time itself needed to be revolutionary. They abolished the Gregorian calendar and replaced it with the Republican calendar, featuring 12 months of 30 days each, all with poetic new names like Thermidor, heat, and Brumaire, fog. But here is the real agenda. Weeks were changed from 7 days to 10. Why? Because 7-day weeks meant Sundays, and Sundays meant church. By eliminating the 7-day cycle, revolutionaries hoped people would simply forget when Sunday was and stop attending religious services. It did not work. People hated 10-day weeks. 1 day off in 10 is miserable. Napoleon eventually scrapped the whole system in 1805. France tried to destroy time and lost. 28. In 2011, France banned ketchup in school cafeterias. Not entirely. Students could still use it on French fries. The irony was noted. But for every other dish, ketchup was forbidden. The reasoning: French children were drowning traditional cuisine in American tomato paste and losing appreciation for real food. The law aimed to protect French culinary heritage by forcing kids to actually taste what they were eating instead of masking everything with processed sweetness. Critics called it nanny-state overreach. Supporters called it cultural defense. Either way, France literally legislated condiment use to protect beef bourguignon from ketchup corruption. This is a country that takes food so seriously that sauce becomes a matter of national policy. And honestly, they might have a point. 29. Modern military camouflage was invented by the French during World War I, and they did it by hiring artists. The French army recruited cubist painters, people who professionally broke shapes and distorted perspectives, to paint artillery, vehicles, and buildings in ways that confused enemy observers. The idea was to disrupt outlines and make equipment harder to identify from a distance or in aerial photographs. The word camouflage comes from the French camoufler, meaning to disguise. Other armies quickly copied the approach. The practice became standard worldwide. So every time you see a soldier in camo, thank avant-garde French painters who figured out that art school training was surprisingly useful for not getting bombed. Picasso's legacy includes confusing snipers. 30. Before the Louvre became the world's most famous museum, it was basically a giant squat. After the French Revolution, the palace was largely abandoned. Artists moved into empty rooms. Homeless families took shelter in the halls. Prostitutes operated in the corridors. The building fell into disrepair, with leaking roofs and crumbling walls. Napoleon eventually restored and expanded it into a proper museum. But for years, the future home of the Mona Lisa was a chaotic, crumbling refuge for anyone who could sneak in. The transformation from ruin to cultural temple took decades. So when you walk through those pristine galleries today, remember that the same floors once hosted very different kinds of Parisian nightlife. The Louvre has seen things. 31. In 1548, the city of Bordeaux revolted against the French crown because of salt. Specifically, a salt tax called the gabelle, which forced everyone to buy overpriced government salt whether they needed it or not. Bordeaux said no, violently. The rebellion grew so intense that the royal representative was killed, and the city essentially told the king to get lost. King Henry II responded by sending an army, stripping Bordeaux of its privileges, executing ringleaders, and humiliating the entire city. The bells of Bordeaux, symbols of local power, were removed. Parliament was suspended. All over salt pricing. The gabelle remained hated for centuries and was finally abolished during the Revolution. Salt. Too important to ignore, too annoying to tax. 32. The French horn is not French. It is German. The instrument developed in Germany during the 17th century, where it was used primarily for hunting. The English started calling it French horn for reasons that remain unclear, possibly because French composers wrote a lot of music for it, or possibly because nobody cared about accuracy. Germans call it Waldhorn, meaning forest horn. The French just call it cor. Only English speakers insist on the French part. So here is a German instrument, misnamed by the English, that the French take no credit for. It is a linguistic accident that stuck around for centuries because correcting it would require international cooperation on a topic nobody considers urgent. The horn remains German. The name remains wrong. 33. Friday the 13th. As an unlucky date may trace back to one of the most dramatic events in French history. On Friday, October 13th in 1307, King Philip IV ordered the mass arrest of the Knights Templar across France. Hundreds of Templars were seized simultaneously, imprisoned, tortured into confessions, and eventually burned at the stake. The order, once the most powerful military organization in Christendom, was destroyed in a single coordinated strike. Whether this is the true origin of the superstition is debated by historians, but the story is too perfect. A king wiping out an entire order of warrior monks on a single cursed date. France may have invented the world's most famous unlucky day while committing one of medieval history's most ruthless power grabs. And that is France, a country that put pigs on trial, taxed windows until people got sick, and tried to delete Sundays from existence. Now I need to settle something. Everyone always says Britain had the craziest empire, but honestly, France might be worse. So here is the fight. France versus Britain, who was historically more unhinged? Pick your side in the comments, and if you say any other country, you better defend that choice. Like this video if France surprised you, and subscribe because next week gets even weirder.